What is up, guys? Welcome back to another incredible episode of the Motivation Everything Show, where every single week I bring on a phenomenal guest live in front of all of you to dive deep. This week, we got Dr. Matt Chalmers with us, and we are going to be diving deep on looking forward and preventing issues before they become a problem. Now, before we dive deep into this incredible subject and I intro Dr. Chalmers, I want you guys to drop live below in the comment section. If you are tuning in live with us today, let us know. If you watch the replay, go ahead and throw replay on there so I can see everybody that's tuning in. Guys, make sure you say hi to Dr. Chalmers for having him with us. Without further ado, help me welcome Dr. Chalmers. Dr. Chalmers is a holistic concierge wellness doctor that treats the entire person. Dr. Chalmers has specialty training and certifications in neurology, nutrition, Eastern medicine, muscle testing, and sports. He has based his practice around getting the body's physiology to work properly again. This requires testing and treatments that are outside of the normal scope of most doctors. Dr. Chalmers will on a routine basis use energetic muscle testing, energetic resonance work, supplementation, diet and exercise, medical drugs, and significant Western medical testing to fully treat his patients. Special emphasis is placed on gut function, stress, energy, psychology, and the way we interact with the world around us. This has led to Dr. Chalmers writing the book, The Pillars of Wellness, that starts the conversation around biomechanical, biochemical, psychological, and spiritual health. While the typical patient that Dr. Chalmers treats are high-end athlete to the CEO, he's looking to step into a more difficult arena and treat stay-at-home moms. That's quite a mouthful. Help me welcome Dr. Chalmers. Welcome, Dr. Chalmers. We're glad to have you with us.
Glad to be here, man.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it, Dr. Chalmers. Tell us your story. How did you get where you're at, bringing this incredible value that you bring to your patients?
So everybody always asks kind of like the origin story of how this all started. So my whole family's engineers, and so that kind of bleeds into why I love the human body, the giant, amazing, best machine we've ever seen. You know, they're all petroleum and oil and gas guys, and I knew I would hate that. And so I was like, I'm going to be a doctor from a young age. And then I was playing football in high school. It was about 16, 17. I was bench pressing roughly 400 pounds and squatting about 600 pounds. I hurt my back and I couldn't walk anymore. And I went and saw neurologists, neurosurgeons, pain specialists, orthopedic guys, radiologists after radiologists. Literally everybody who had a medical license to look at me, I went and saw. And at the end of this like 3-week escapade, they all kind of got together and they sent this little kid in who looked like he was about 105 pounds and 5'5" and had never seen the sun. And he's like, hey, we've all talked about this. And, basically what we've come to conclusion is that there's nothing really wrong with you because we did tests and we can't find anything wrong with you. And you just don't want to play football anymore. And so that's really what this is. And I remember looking at him and going, if you were close enough to me, I would break you in half. And he was just, all of a sudden, he was just so astonished that I was mad at him. He just called me a liar and a fraud. But, all of a sudden, anyway. So I called my coach and I'm like, hey, man, I can't play ball anymore. I can't even walk. And he says, go see our team chiropractor. And because this is how life treats me, I remember telling him, I need a doctor, not a massage. And he said, well, go anyway. It's free. And I was like, all right. So my parents literally carried me in, tossed me on the table. And Dr. Harris takes the x-rays that the medical guys had for several hours and clicks up on the thing and goes, oh, it's right there. He just adjusts me and I get up, I walk out and I go back to practice 3 days later. And that's when I was like, okay, maybe I was a little arrogant. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe these chiropractor guys have a spot in healthcare. And so that's what I decided I wanted to do. And it's kind of funny because I've been so, I've worked with so many medical guys so long that there's such an amazing piece Western medicine obviously brings to the table to heal and to help. But there's also so much that, the Eastern medicine and that type of thing brings that when you pair the two together, you really get an amazing amount of functionality. So that's kind of where I came from. And then where the concierge started was I treated a guy who was 60, 62, somewhere in there. And he came in and he just sold his company for $22 million, something like that. So he, like, literally, that's the most money I'd ever heard of anyone getting at one time. And so I was just like, oh my God, what are you going to, yeah, it's just a little bit. I was like, oh my God, what are you going to do? I was like, I would go to Italy. There's this World War II tour where you start Normandy and you go up. And he's like, stop. He goes, I can't get to the top of my stairs without my knees hurting so bad I got to sit down. He goes, I can't walk the dogs around the block without getting tired and having to sit down and rest. He's like, I'm not going to Italy. He goes, there's some restaurants I really want to try, and there's some shows I need to catch up on. He was like, so that's pretty much what I'm going to plan on doing. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I walk out of the room and I freaked out. And I was like, there's no way in hell I'm going to let that happen to me. I'm not going to work my whole life, be super young at 60, and be so broken and so sick and so messed up that I can't enjoy the rest of my life, that my quality of life is crap. So that's what kind of started the massive amounts of research that I've kind of gone into. And it was really just for me at the beginning. And then as I started doing more and more of this, my medical buddies, my Eastern buddies all started coming to me and being like, hey, what's that study that you told me about you were doing for this and that? And so as it kind of came together, they started sending me their patients for basically just maintenance and like, how do we keep prevention? How do we keep things from happening? And so that's kind of where a lot of this started. I got a guy who came in and this always makes me tear up, but he came in and he goes, hey man, my business partner was the healthiest guy I knew. So he had a 6-pack. He was like, he's super healthy. He's like, he just dropped dead on the soccer field yesterday of a heart attack. He's like, I got 2 little girls, man, that can't happen to me. And so we started working with him and he was super messed up. His doctor said, he was like, you're fine, don't worry. We started looking at him. We did a calcium CT, he had massive plaquing in his arteries. His cholesterol was fine, but plaquing was terrible, which I see pretty much every day. So we had to clean that up. And then his testosterone was like 150 or something. It's really, really low. So we got that back up, changed his diet. And now the guy's down like 40 pounds and he's just killing it. So that's kind of where all this has started, is just, just the lack of functionality, lack of people doing this. So that's kind of where everything's kind of come from.
Wow, that's incredible. And it's amazing how, your story and what you went through and going to that chiropractor led you on this journey, which having a completely different approach than, most doctors do in your profession.
Yeah, no, it was really, really strange. And I've never really been the guy who sits in a hall room or a lecture room and, is told something and goes, oh, I'm going to believe that 100%. So, it's always been one of those, okay, I need to go look over here. I need to go look at some different things and figure out how we're going to do it. And everybody teases me. They're like, everybody who comes to your office is going to hear about, Eastern medicine meridian repair. They're going to hear about coffee enemas. They're going to hear about injectable testosterone. They're going to hear about, MRIs and CTs for, heart studies. They're like, you live completely in both worlds. And I'm like, well, my patients need stuff from both worlds. Why would I not, do them? And so, yeah, it's just made everything totally different. So.
That's awesome. Well, the topic of tonight is looking forward and preventing issues before they become a problem. So let's start with the looking forward and that preventative and awareness side. Let's start there and then kind of walk through being aware of what's important we need to know about first, which most might not even know, and then what we can do to test for that to be more aware, and then preventative things. Can you kind of walk us slowly through that process? Like, what things should we be thinking about, from all the way from people my age? I'm a young 26-year-old man right now. What should I be forward thinking about, all the way to somebody that's 50, 60 years old right now, that's maybe a little bit ahead in life? What advice would you give us?
So I work with a lot of guys just like you, Cody, who are highly driven, who are working really hard, who are pushing themselves, who are grinding out every day. And that's fantastic. And I always tell people, there's 2 types of doctors. There's the guys who work on the Toyota Corollas, and that's a fine car, that's great. And there's guys who work on twin turbocharged W12 Ferraris. They obviously are both cars, but they're obviously very, very different in their performance, their function, and how hard they go. So I always tell people, look, if you're grinding it out and you're pushing yourself really hard, you are not, you're 28, 30, this age group, you are not your parents. Because when we go home, we still got our cell phones. We never leave work. We never stop. We wake up early. We're on the computer. We're going. We're making videos all the time. We're editing them. It's a hard life, high stress that we live now. Our parents didn't have that. Our parents, when they got home, they had 3 or 4 channels they could watch on TV, and they all went to bed at 9 and got up later. And yeah, they had stress, but it wasn't constant like ours. It wasn't, we get inundated with it. So the biggest thing we got to look at is, what is the stress doing to our body? And so when we have stress, the biggest thing we have to understand is that there's 2 different types of nervous systems. The sympathetic, which is fight flight, which is anything of stress, you're in sympathetic, and then the parasympathetic, which is resting, digesting, healing. So what we have to understand is that if we're going to be stressed out, we cannot be resting, digesting. So we have to take extra supplementation. We have to recognize that anything we eat is not going to be absorbed properly. So we're going to have more gut issues. We're going to have to spend more time worrying about our gut. And so these are things that we just kind of have to recognize, that if we don't start focusing on what our stress is doing and how to accommodate for it, in 5, 10, 15 years, we're going to be in a really bad place. I tell people, if you're sailing from Miami to Spain and you're off by 1 degree, you end up in a completely different country. So if we don't constantly manage where are we and where are we going, we're going to be in a really bad place. So stress is probably the number 1 thing to start with. So that's what I tell people is, like, manage your stress properly. So psychologically, a lot of people they've been taught, or they like to wake up in the morning and meditate and then work out. And I would rather you do that if it's like, look, I'm not going to work out unless I work out in the morning. Okay, that's better than nothing. But the best way to do it is to start your day, start going, your stress starts coming up, and then about 11 to 1, you go work out. And we know that working out drops our stress through the floor. Cool. Now, as soon as you're done working out, eat, because now you're parasympathetic. Eat so you can digest that food. Then as you start your day back up after lunch and your stress starts coming up, when you get home, go ahead and start meditation. Start doing that. Drop your stress back down. Once your stress comes back down, you're relaxed, then eat. So we can get this digestion functioning again. One of the things I tell people is, a lot of people go, I like to have a glass of wine every night, but I know that I shouldn't be drinking alcohol and this stuff. I'm like, okay, hold on. When you take that glass of wine, you take that first sip and you put that glass down, do you go and feel yourself kind of unwind? And if the patient goes, yeah, I'm like, okay, that glass of wine, not that bottle, but that glass of wine is hypercritical to your health. What you're actually feeling isn't an alcohol. It isn't the sugar from the grapes. It's, you've just flipped a switch in your brain that said, hey, I'm done for the day. Turn off the stress. You feel yourself shifting from sympathetic back to parasympathetic. So those are the keys I always tell people, like, you got to structure your day in a way that you can eat without the stress destroying your functionality. So that'd be the first little piece I tell people to do.
That's phenomenal. So reducing stress, obviously that's huge. And the big takeaways I wrote down was working out between that 11 to 1 window as that stress is starting to build. That's interesting, because I think for me, I always get my workouts in. Typically, I'm more of a morning workout guy, but I go any time of day that I can fit it in. But I've noticed that, like, between 1 and 3 for me, those 2-hour windows, like, when I feel the most, like, just, it's hard for me to, like, kick it into overdrive. I always feel more tired in that part of the day. And I wonder if working out in that window would help me out. Would that help with energy as well?
Absolutely. So the other thing it's going to do is it's going to raise endorphin levels. It's going to raise, all sorts of different things in the blood. You're going to get your serotonin kick back up, your dopamine kick back up. So because you're going to get that reward system from the brain, right? Because you went in, you wanted to work out, you got it done. And then every single rep, every single set kicks a little bit more dopamine. So you're going to get a little bit more reward system out of it. So that's really, really going to help with energy. And here's a really big key I always tell people, as when we're talking about hormones and testosterone, is I go, after you work out, do you have more or less energy? And if they go, less, it actually tires me out. I'm like, you have low T. Like, almost, it's not every time, but it's a vast majority of the time. If someone goes, yeah, man, I'm good to go. Like, I can't go work out real hard and then immediately go to sleep. All right. We can check it, but your T is probably okay. So that's one of the big cycles that we know, because, you should always be energized after you work out. So, that's
interesting. Really, so if you're not, then your T level is probably low.
Yeah. So that's, the first thing someone tells me that, they're like, no, man, when I work out, there's 2 big keys I'm working out. If you're more tired after you work out than before, and if you're sore for more than 2 days, more than a day and a half, 2 days, especially if you've been working out for a while, then I know you're not rebuilding. So there's a big piece that we always talk about called the point of diminishing returns. So if your body, the reason you get bigger and better and stronger when you work out is because you tear the muscle tissue down, right? And the body rebuilds it. Now, if you tear the muscle tissue down 3 units, but your body has the ability to rebuild 5, you're going to get benefit out of that. It's going to be healthy. You're going to get bigger and stronger. If you tear your body down 3 units, but your body only can rebuild 2, you're going to be pushing yourself into a position where you're actually doing more damage than your body can recover from. And so you're doing bad things to your body. And so that's when we start looking at it and being like, okay, where are your calories at? Are you eating enough? A lot of my female athletes are not eating nearly enough calories. Do you have enough testosterone? A lot of my 35, 40-year-olds don't have the testosterone they need. Are you sleeping enough? Are you getting enough water? Is the quality of your sleep good? Do you have sleep apnea? So we start running through some of these things and being like, okay, this is why you're not functioning at your highest possible ability. And then we just fix that thing and you're good to go. So
now, and speaking of that, if say someone that's watching this is struggling, maybe an older man or something with T levels, what advice would you give them to raise that?
So there's a couple different things I always make sure I tell people. The first thing is go get tested. Let's say you're 50 or you're 40 or whatever. Let's say you're 40. That's easy. We've been taught at 40, because back in the day when we were watching those, after school specials, that testosterone and steroids were cheating and that they were bad for you and that you're going to die and all these things. Well, if we actually look at the actual research, what we see is that testosterone reduces anxiety, it reduces clinical depression, which is more apathy. I hate myself, but just, you're sitting at home staring at the wall and be like, hey, you want to go play baseball? No. You want to do this? Let's go to a movie. You just don't want to do anything. Because that you just don't. And then people always talk about, well, steroids build muscles, and I really don't need to build muscles. And my reply to that is always, what about your heart? That's a big muscle. You don't want that to repair. Your blood vessels all have muscles in them. So if you've heard of a DVT, what happens is the lumen that the blood vessel is, when the muscles get weak, it starts to collapse. And so the blood slows down, coagulates, turns into a clot, and that's what kills you. So if we can keep our blood vessels open because the muscles are strong, it decreases the chances of DVT. So, we also, with men, it radically increases sex drive and functionality. So there's lots of higher things. If you're a man, when you come to see me and we do our concierge piece, we're pulling your testosterone whether you think you need it or not. Because if you feel amazing, I want to know how much testosterone you need to feel amazing. If it's 500, 700, or 1200, that's important for later. Because if, let's say it's 1200, and then later you don't feel good anymore, and we pull your testosterone at 700. Well, 700 is really good for a lot of people, but it's not good for you. One of the things I always tell people is, I can pull your blood and tell you exactly how much testosterone you have in your body, but nobody can tell us how many receptors you have. And so that's the key. So the hormone's like the key to the lock, and the receptor's the lock. Well, if you have 1,000 keys and 5 locks, you're not going to be able to get those receptors to the locks very easy. So if you have 10,000 keys, you're going to get them to the receptors easier. If you have 1 million receptors, you don't need very many keys to get those things to work. And so it's a very oversimplification of it, but that's one of those things. So I want to know where you are, even if you feel great, so that we can then, like I said, plan for the future. But that's one of those big things is getting it. It's just a blood test. Just get it checked.
Right. And just being aware of that, knocking out and finding out where you're at on that. Now, what things do people need to be more self-aware of health-wise to prevent?
So one of the things, I have a whole big litany of things that I do for women because I feel really bad. I feel like women have been left out in the cold as far as medicine goes. But one of the big things I always tell people is 500,000 people, 500,000 people are going to die this year from a heart-related incident. Most of them will die never knowing they had a heart issue. The first heart attack they have is the one that kills them. So I always ask people when they've had a heart attack or their dad's had a heart attack or something, I go, hey, have you had your calcium CT? And they go, oh, I don't need to worry about that. My plaquing is I don't have cholesterol issues. Well, Harvard research tells us that 50 to 55% of every person who's had a heart attack had good to great cholesterol. So what that's really telling us is that cholesterol isn't as great of an indicator of heart disease as we thought it was. So if we get a calcium CT, it'll show how much plaquing we have in the chest and on the arteries around the heart. So that gives us tremendous information. And then, so that's a great way to kind of figure it out. And, everybody knows about breast cancer. We talk about breast cancer every year, and it's terrible. We need to figure out how to fix it. But 50,000 women die from that a year, and that is bad. But 250,000 women die a year from heart attacks. So if we just get some more information, be like, hey, look, we need to take care of these women, our women, our moms, our wives, our daughters. If we need to take care of them, let's go get a heart study. Do a 3-day heart study where you just put a sticker on you and you monitor your heart for 3 days. Do we have any electrical issues that we didn't know about? Just because you're laying in bed or you're walking around and you're not having chest pain doesn't mean you don't have something that's going to become a problem in 5-10 years. If we find out today, we can fix it today, or we can start treating it today so it doesn't become something bigger later. So those are the big things around the heart I do. And then the other biggest thing is that, I'm a huge sleep study fan. Like, do a home sleep study. Everybody has to do them. And the reason I say that is because I didn't know, I know now, obviously. I didn't know it, but I am the prime apnea person. I would sleep 6 hours, wake up 100% ready to go, tons of energy, feet hit the floor, ready to go. Total morning person. I'd go 18 hours hard, good to go. So while we're doing different studies for my patients, and I decided I was going to do the sleep apnea study, and I am the worst patient I've ever studied, and I don't know, several thousand people. I had no idea. And so now that I know, oh, look, my chest is giant. I have a 19-inch neck. Okay, well, obviously that's going to lead to sleep apnea. But we test people all the time. I had a 28-year-old girl who was in pristine magazine style like fitness shape, and she had migraine headaches all the time. And she had every study done we could ever find on her. And as I'm looking through them, I'm like, hey, I don't see your sleep study. And I was like, go back to your neurologist and get a sleep study. So she goes back in and she talks to her neurologist. She comes back and she talks to me and she's like, hey, my neurologist told me that, I'm not a 50-year-old fat guy, so I didn't need a sleep study. He told me that my chiropractor was crazy. She goes, but you kind of sold me on it. I want to do it. And I was like, cool. So I ordered her one. Bad apnea. We got her a CPAP. Never had a migraine again. So it's not super expensive to get these studies done. Just get them done. If your doctor,
I've had one done.
Have you? How'd you turn out? Were you good?
I have sleep apnea.
Okay. See, and you're the type of guy that there's no way I'd ever look at you and be like, that's the guy.
Because I have tonsil issues. They're not removed. And I have like inflamed tonsils and big issues with that. And that's typically what causes mine, I think.
Okay. So, and see, that's the thing, right? Just talking to you is like right now, the first thing my first thought of my head isn't sleep apnea, but I would still have checked because I want more data. Checking on these things is super important. So, because sleep apnea leads to, dementia, Alzheimer's, heart attacks, strokes, low testosterone, low quality of life. Imagine if you didn't get good sleep ever. That's basically what ends up happening. And so, but people don't notice it because their quality goes down so slowly over time that by the time they're 33, 35, you're just waking up exhausted all the time.
And that lack of oxygen to the brain while you sleep. I mean, I think I was around like 80% or something, so I'm not terrible, but still.
Well, you want to keep it around. I don't let anybody go lower than 88, because if you're lower than 88, I get you a CPAP. It's pretty much all the time, especially if you're younger, if you're 30, 35, something like that, because it's only going to get worse as you get older. But yeah, so no, it's a big deal.
So we talked about stress. We talked about the value of good sleep and figuring that out. And we also talked about heart and things like that. And it's not always cholesterol like people think. What else would you add to that people should be aware of now to prevent issues before they actually become a major medical problem?
So one of the biggest things that I've been dealing with, that it's funny to me because people have been coming in from all over the country for me to work on their Sever's disease and plantar fasciitis stuff. So for those of you who don't know, Sever's is basically really bad plantar fasciitis, but it's in kids. What happens is that the Achilles tendon gets too tight and it literally rips off a part of the bone at the growth plate, and it can be super painful. And the people who we usually see this in are gymnasts. So what happens is that when we look at the body from a machine standpoint, what we have to understand is that the way that we use the body on a regular basis, it builds on itself. So if you're jumping or running and so you're pushing down with your foot all the time, the calf muscle is going to get not just stronger, but it's going to increase in what we call resting neurologic tone. So it's going to get tighter and tighter and tighter. And the muscle on the other side, the anterior tibialis, is going to get looser and looser and looser. So what ends up happening is that the muscle from the calf gets too tight, pulls on the Achilles tendon, pulls back on the calcaneus or the heel bone, and flattens the plantar fascia. So you're going to have plantar fasciitis, you're going to have foot issues, you're going to have ankle problems, you're going to have instability, you're going to get balance problems. And if you're a young gymnast, it's going to tear off and you're going to get severs. So the way that you fix this is you adjust the ankle so all the joints are moving properly, and then you compress the tendon and the heel called the Achilles tendon. And when you compress it, it has little mechanoreceptors called Golgi tendon organs. What their job is to send a message to the brain that goes, oh, we are really tight. Something crazy is going on. You have to relax the calf or it's going to tear the tendon. So the brain sends a message back down to the calf that says, hey, you've got to relax this calf as you're moving it. So as you're moving it, you're activating the anterior tibialis. As you activate the top muscle, it calms the whole thing down. So that whole system is basically what we're talking about for relaxing and resetting neurologic muscle tone. So it works in the wrists or carpal tunnel. I get these guys just, it's funny because carpal tunnel is super easy to fix. For $6, you can jump on Amazon and Google finger rubber bands, and they look like little silicone brass knuckles. And they're funny. You stick them on your fingers and you just open your hand. This is all you do. And you work this type of the muscle instead of this one, because everything we do, we close our fist. We type, we hold, we lift weights, we make a fist all the time, but we don't ever exercise that motion. So by exercising this motion, this muscle starts kind of puffing back up. It opens up the carpal tunnel, allows the nerves to function. No more hand problems, no more wrist problems, more functionality, more coordination. So
interesting.
So that type of thing is a big deal. Now, where it really is playing in a lot these days, everybody's on their cell phone, so they're like this, or they're on their keyboards and they're like this. Okay. So as you're doing that more and the head pitches forward, you're going to start and you roll forward. You can't breathe as well. So your lungs aren't expanding as much. So you're getting 20%, 30% less oxygen through the day. So you're more tired at the end of the day. Also, you're going to start getting tension in your neck, your jaw, your upper portion of your neck into your skull, sinus headaches, ear infections, teeth problems, things like that. So I always tell people, get that monitor up here so that you're looking up at it, and pull that keyboard here so that you're doing this. It'll completely change your resting postural tone, and then everything kind of gets reset. Everything works better.
Boom. I love it. What preventative style blood work and test would you recommend that people get done?
So one of the big ones, like I said, I work with a bunch of women for these type of things. Women aren't getting their iron checked nearly enough. Most of the athletes I work with, I say most because it's all I can think of off the top of my head, but I don't know if it's 100% of them, need iron specifically several days before their menstrual cycle so that they can keep their oxygenation levels and keep the cells functioning better. So checking your iron, checking your D3. So D3 is an amazing, amazing vitamin, if you want to call it vitamin. It's more of a hormone, but that's a different argument. So what happens is that it actually signals the body that says, hey, we need more bones, so I need you to pull that calcium ion in and go build some bone with it. Hey, our immune system's a little bit weak right now. I need you to pull that chloride ion on and go make some more white blood cells because we got to fight this virus or fight this bacteria. So I always tell people, 30 isn't good enough. Like I always tell my patients, I want your D3 levels somewhere between 60 and 100. Closer to 100 the better, but I want them high. And D3 is super cheap. So taking extra D3, 10,000, 20,000 IUs a day isn't going to break the bank. So D3 is a really, really important one to check. Now, the other one that's super important, especially because of stress, are your B vitamins, and not just B12. B6 and folic are critical to liver functionality, and B2 really helps us sleep. So we've got to pull all of those in. So taking a fully methylated multi-spectrum B vitamins can be really, really important. So when you pull your labs, make sure that you're not just pulling B12, but you're pulling folic, you're pulling iron, you're pulling your B6, B2, those other things as well. So, and this kind of gets us into a strange little place I like to talk about because everyone talks about the gut, and the gut's super important, but I'm a huge liver guy. So you've heard of gallstones, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no such thing. They don't exist. And
okay.
So this is my point. So this is my hand. This is my ring. This is my ring in my hand. It's not a hand ring. It's a ring that was put into my hand. This is important because the gallbladder does not produce anything. The gallbladder is a bag that holds stuff. The liver produces bile. If we lose folic acid and B6, that bile salt that's supposed to be a really slick WD-40 consistency congeals into basically rubber cement. That rubber cement then dehydrates into balls while it's in the gallbladder. And that's where we start to see gallbladder issues, because those balls get crushed together and they get too big to come down the common bile duct. And so people go, oh, you have a gallbladder issue. We're going to, all these balls, these stones in your gallbladder, we'll just cut your gallbladder out and the problem will be fine. Well, no, the junk that's in your gallbladder is coming from your liver. You have a liver issue. And if you don't fix the liver issue, you're going to end up with fibromyalgia, you're going to end up with chronic fatigue, you're going to end up with all sorts of other problems because your liver can't clean your blood properly. Like there's cancer issues, there's all sorts of things. So that's really when I start looking at stuff and being like, if you start having gallstone issues, especially at a young age, we have a massive issue with your B vitamins. And we really need to focus on the liver and cleaning up the liver. So, those type of things, when we start seeing blood work where our B vitamins aren't where they're supposed to be, we have MTFHR issues, which is a methylation problem, so you can't produce B vitamins properly. That's really when we're going to start looking at it and being like, okay, we're really messed up. We've got to really worry about the liver, because the liver pulls, everyone talks about pulling inflammation out of your gut. What do you think pulls that inflammation out? The liver pulls the inflammation out of your gut. So we've got to really worry about the liver getting super clean. So those labs really help us to kind of figure out what's going on in the body.
It's interesting that we kind of touched on gut health there, because that's somewhere I was going to go. I think gut health is one of the biggest problems that I see people have. Even interesting enough, in my age demographic I'm at right now, I see quite a bit people struggling with gut issues. I was even diagnosed with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, at 21. And I don't take medication anymore. I really honed in my diet and my exercise. But I mean, major issues within my gut. What advice would you give to somebody having gut health issues?
So we actually work a lot with that. So celiac, IBS are things that we do almost every day. So that requires, for a full, really solid IBS, celiac treatment, what we do is we start with Eastern medicine and repair all the damaged meridian lines. So your meridians, think of your meridians as a third communication system of the body. So you have biochemical, which is your hormone system, bioelectrical, which is your nervous system, and then electromagnetic or photo-optic, which is the meridian system. So think of them as fiber optic cables. They can be damaged by piercings, punctures, blunt force trauma, burns, things like that. So we go through and I go, hey, where were your vaccines? Do you have a belly button piercing? Have you had tailbone trauma, head trauma? Have you had any surgeries? So when we go through there, we can then repair those damaged meridian points. So like the thigh vaccines, belly buttons, tailbone trauma, epidurals all go to the stomach, and they sedate function in the stomach. So we don't produce hydrochloric acid. When you don't properly produce hydrochloric acid, then you can't kill some viruses, some bacteria, and you can't kill a lot of parasites. And so we end up eating these parasitic eggs. We grow parasites. It creates inflammation of the bowel. If we have a parasitic infection, we've got to kill that first. Then we can go back through, work on the detox organs, your kidneys, your liver, your colon, rebuild the gut with proper probiotic, and then it'll calm down all the inflammation. And that's kind of where we move from there on out. So IBS is a really, really big deal because, one, we're highly sedated to the stomach. Two, we have tons of stress. And like I said, that stress point shuts down the gut function. So we have that. And then the food we're eating, we really have to work hard to make good food choices. We have some wheat that we can eat and a whole lot we can't. We have some milk products we can consume and a whole lot we can't. And so you've got to be super, super picky on what you eat, when you eat it, how you eat it. Depending on where you go for meat, so a lot of the cows and a lot of the dairy stuff that we're consuming, those cows are eating corn that was produced through genetic modification, and it's labeled not fit for human consumption. Well, a cow is not a human, so you can legally feed it to a cow. But then if you get milk or you get meat from that cow, you're basically consuming that product. And so that's highly inflammatory. It creates a lot of issues. So those are some of the reasons we got to be very careful about where things come from. So, people talk about grass-fed, grass-finished. So what that means is that they took this cow, they put it in a pasture, and they let it eat grass literally to the day they slaughtered it for meat. So that's basically what that means. So just grass-fed But
I
it
was going
doesn't.
to ask because I've recently made the switch to grass-fed beef only, and
Yep.
I've noticed like it. I feel it phenomenal since I've made that switch. Is that something you would recommend that people do to avoid those, GMOs and things like that?
So if you're going to eat red meat, absolutely, grass-fed, grass-finished is the way to go. And there's lots of ways of doing it. The way I recommend my patients do it is like, do you have 4 or 5 friends who like red meat? If they go, yeah, I'm like, go buy a cow. Go to one of the local farmers, buy the cow. They will slaughter it for you and give it to you. The reason you need 4 or 5 friends is that I don't know if you can eat 1,000 pounds of meat by yourself before it goes bad. So, but that's the thing. So you can go buy a cow and you're good to go. But make sure it's grass-fed, grass-finished. That's a big piece. So
Anybody want to go buy a grass-fed cow with me? Let me know.
it's a great option. You're gonna be in Southern Cali soon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's some places out there.
Thanks for dropping that. Nobody knows.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was a
Surprise,
thing.
guys. Moving to San Diego in 10 days.
So, man, I don't feel terrible because I just blew up some stuff. So, no, so there's places out there if you need some help. I've got some chefs that are out there and stuff like that. So I can give you guys some contacts and stuff like that with good stuff. So, but no, so that, the meat thing brings up a big interesting piece because, people come in all the time and they're like, what should I eat? Because everybody wants the diet. Like, they're like, isn't there a diet because we're humans that we should be eating? Or they come in and they're like, hey, I watched Forks Over Knives. Shouldn't I be vegan? And stuff like that. And it's like, well, maybe. Everyone talks about how, there's this diet and this is that diet for human beings. And at the same time, they'll come out and they'll say, look at this fantastic diversity we have. People from all over the world, different cultures, different, races, different, everything, all in one spot in the US. And I'm like, how can you in one hand talk about diversity and then the other thing say that we're all exactly biochemically the same? And so that's been a big point of contention for me because there are patients I have that are complete vegan and they're healthier than they've ever been. And I've got guys that are carnivore, like literally 180 degrees from each other. And now they're super healthy. And so one of the things I always tell people is just because Susan or your buddy Ted is on this great diet doesn't mean it's the right diet for you. And so that's a big piece that we always talk about too. So
no, you're hitting on something huge that I want to spend some time talking about. And we talked a little bit before we went live tonight about this, but we're all different. Like what works for you, Dr. Chalmers, might not work for me. Let's talk. I want you to touch on different blood types, actually figuring out what works for you. It's like, it's hard because we look at people or we have friends or influences in our life or influencers online that we follow that say like, hey, do this keto diet and you're going to get shredded. Or, hey, do the carnivore diet and you're going to get ripped, or all these different things that you hear. And I feel like everybody like automatically assumes, well, if it worked for them, it must work for me. Can you go more deep on that and why that's not true and what we need to do to figure out what works for us?
Yeah, so I can touch on it. I always tell people, there's simple and there's easy. Like running a marathon is simple. You just run this way, 26.2 miles, but it's in no way easy. So that's kind of how the diet stuff is. And so I'll go over kind of a big overview of how I set them up for my patients. So I always have them first go get a resting metabolic rate. So we know how many calories you're supposed to eat in a day because calories in, calories out is still a real thing. And then what we'll do next is we'll say, okay, let's look at your body type. We look at the somatotyping diet stuff because I'm a real big fan of this idea. If you're an ectomorph, which is someone who looks like a Kenyan runner, very, very lean, very skeleton, that type of thing. If you want to gain muscle mass, you have to eat a lot more sugar. Because basically what happens is that your body doesn't process insulin the same way as some other people do. So like for those guys, they want to gain weight and they're like, I've worked out so hard, I've taken this, I've done that, but I've never been able to gain weight. And I'm like, cool, here's what I want you to do. 8 ounces of pineapple juice with 3 grams of leucine after you work out every time. And then right before you go to bed, 8 ounces of orange juice with 3 grams of leucine. So leucine is an amino acid, which is actually, our bodies don't need protein. That's a misnomer. Our bodies take protein, digest it into amino acids, and then reconstitute those amino acids into whatever they want. Leucine has the highest muscle protein synthesis of any other amino acid. So we take that amino acid and we build muscle out of it. Now here's the catch though. It has to get into the muscle to build muscle. So if you don't process insulin well, we got to give you a ton of sugar to push that leucine into the cell. So that's why right after we work out and your muscles are torn down, I want to give it all the leucine. So we use pineapple juice, orange juice, something with a high sugar content that's still more or less natural to force that stuff in. So they have to have, the ectomorphs have to have the sugar. So on the other end of the spectrum, we've got our endomorphs, which I'm more endo. If you give these guys sugar, they will go right to sleep because their body just sucks it all up and then they just kind of wither and pass out. So these guys do really well on keto or carnivore. So that's kind of where these guys are. But, you're going to see that, like, if you watch Game of Thrones, the Mountain is a great example of an endomorph. If you ever watch The World's Strongest Man, those are almost all going to be your endomorphs. They're just big, round, tons of power. Yeah, big dudes, tons of power, but they're also not going to be, cut up on stage that often. Then you have your middle guys, those are your mesomorphs, and they can eat pretty much whatever they want, which is why we all hate them. So that's your Arnold Schwarzenegger. That's your, who's the guy who did The Witcher?
What's his name? It's so interesting. I was just watching that actually last night again.
Yeah, and that guy is awesome. But they did an interview with him. They're like, "What was your crazy diet?" He's like, "Pizza and beer." He's like, "Whatever I want." So yeah, you're the classic mesomorph, and so of course you can eat whatever you want. But so those guys, they have they're a little bit different body structure. So that's why just in that little tiny breakdown, and to be 100% honest, no one really is an endomorph, ectomorph, or mesomorph. They're all, that's it, Henry Cavill, thank you. They're all somewhere in the middle. And so, like, I'm endo-meso. I'm 80% endo, 20% meso. And that's something I kind of help my people find out is, okay, so now that we know where you're at, now we can produce your macro diet, right? So we're going to say, okay, look, you need 45, 50% of your calories from fat. You need 30 from protein. You need 20 from carbohydrates. But we're going to break that carbohydrate down a little bit more. So carbohydrates break into sugar, carbohydrates, and insoluble fiber. If you're going to be eating fat and protein, I want your insoluble fiber high because we got to force everything through the bowel so that we don't get any constipation. We don't get anything stuck in the gut. So we're going to really work on that. Now, the sugars we can take to zero. And so you'll be fine with that. And the carbohydrates you can leave a little bit up unless you're really focusing on ketogenic. You really want to be in ketosis. Then we can shove those down a little bit. But there's even fun little things you can play with that. So you're like, okay, we're going to throw a little bit of carbohydrate, but we're going to use cinnamon. Cinnamon decreases glycemic impact or glycemic function. So we're not going to have as much sugar released from it. So it's not going to kick us out of ketosis. Obviously, fiber, fat, and protein also slow down carbohydrate release of insulin. And so we can play with that a little bit if we play with the diet. Because it's like, hey, man, I got to have, like, my big thing when I was keto was there's Costco carries this keto bread. It's amazing. The slices are about as big as my palm. But you put a little Kerrygold butter on it, and it's amazing. So that was one of my things. So those are some of the things that we can kind of figure out. Okay, here's where all this is. Now the other piece of that, so that's what are we putting in our mouth? The other one is where's our body to begin with? If your testosterone is off, if your thyroid hormone is off, if you have diabetes or something like that, we're going to have hormonal problems that we also have to address. So a lot of times, so type 2 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. And most autoimmune diseases that I've found, you can actually reverse or more or less eliminate with the right diet. So like type 2 diabetes, if you cut the sugars out, you reverse that insulin resistance, a lot of times you can get that to completely go away. And so that's a really, really cool one. I've been able to do it with vegan diets. I've been able to do it with carnivore diets. So you can do it either way. It's just, you've got to make sure that it's right. The diet's right for the person. So, and then when you talk about blood types, I think get to a really, really good place of not analogy, but kind of like showing us history, right? So my wife and I we both have the same dosha. We're both kaphas. We're both type O. We're both endomorphs. We're same exact, but she is, for the last 200 and something years, her family's lived in Lebanon, Palestine, that Arab area. So she's highly Arab. So she eats things that the Arabs have been eating for hundreds of years. I'm Native American and Scottish. So the diet that my ancestors have been eating is a little different than hers, which is why she can eat things that I.
We got no sound for you right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, good to go.
Sorry, man. What we see now is that we'll have a group of people who have been living in a specific spot, eating whatever they could get from that spot. And so what ends up happening is that the ones who couldn't survive off that food or couldn't thrive off that food, they died. So they didn't produce more children. And so over the course of 10, 12, 15 generations, this group of people eats only this type of food. They can't survive on things that they didn't have. So like you look at the Inuit Eskimo, they survive tremendously well off of, high fat protein diets because they're eating seals all the time. If you gave them a vegan diet, they would not be able to process it because they don't have the enzymes and the bacteria anymore to process vegetables because they live in an icy tundra. And so that's one of those things. If you look at a lot of the deep Asians and you give them red meat, they don't process it well because for hundreds of years, they didn't have access to tons of red meat. And so when you start looking at the blood types, that's where I like to go is, okay, you're AB, tell me a little bit about where you're from. And they're like, oh, I'm from Detroit. Cool. Where are your parents from? Oh, my parents grew up in Korea. All right. How much further back do we go in Korea? Oh, I'm the first generation in America. Okay. So you have a long, strong history of Korean diet. Then when you look at, okay, what was the typical Korean diet? That might be something that gives us a little bit more insight into what's going on with you. And so it's high fish, like let's look at Mediterranean because I'm very, very familiar with that one. It's high oils, it's high fish. There's vegetable stuff. So you're looking at, garbanzo beans and legumes and things like that. So here's the set that we've got. And then we can kind of go through it and be like, okay, this is how we're going to redesign your diet. So like I said, it's not necessarily going to be the same thing as your best friend, because if your best friend is from Jamaica and you're from Texas for 40 generations, then we're going to eat different things.
Totally. So we did have someone in the audience, and guys, you can ask questions live just like this person did, and said, curious, what's the real truth with protein? Do we really need hundreds of grams to grow muscle?
So no, the generally accepted thing is it's 1.5 to 2 grams per pound of body weight or kilogram of body weight. That's not really something I love. Because here's the problem with too much protein. Too much protein it's not going to all get digested, because if you have any stress, you're not going to produce the protease or the enzyme to break it apart, and it's not going to get absorbed very well. And so it's going to put tons of pressure on the gut and tons of pressure on the kidneys, constipation and things like that. So what I like to tell my patients is, what are our goals? Because you can still eat the protein and get the alanine and glycine to make, for gluconeogenesis, so your brain still has glucose if you're going to be in ketosis. Or if you're like, hey, I have a lot of inflammatory issues. My uncle and my dad had cancer issues in their colon. Well, we need to get a lot of histidine in you. So you can take these individual amino acids and get tremendous results without eating tons and tons of protein. So one of the biggest things that your body doesn't run real well off protein. It runs real well off carbohydrates and fat. So if we're going to build a diet, pick a fuel source, carbohydrate or fat, and then kind of add the protein in for what you need to do. Kind of like what I said, if you want to build muscle, leucine is a great thing to add in. I like to throw a little isoleucine in as well, because isoleucine acts kind of like insulin and forces stuff into the tissues, into the muscles a lot better. So as an endomorph, isoleucine is the only thing I'm putting in. I'm not going to put sugar in me to increase my insulin. I'm going to use isoleucine. And so that's kind of the route I tell people to go is, cut to the chase. Just give your body what you want it to have. Because, there's several things that if our body gets too much of, it just doesn't work properly. And so there's some amino acids that actually create plaquing and create problems in the arteries. So, supplementing with amino acids is a much better way to do it than just eating tons and tons of protein.
Awesome. Someone in the audience also asked, can you improve the body function of someone with MS through diet alone?
Yeah, we've actually done this a whole bunch of times. So the last guy that we had in, we took sugar completely out of his diet. We reset his gut. We reset the meridian pathways like I talked about. And he actually went carnivore, and he was having trouble seeing. He couldn't sleep very well, and he was starting to twitch and lose muscle function. And when he went carnivore and cut all the sugar out and cut all the inflammation out, and we cleaned up his liver, he's got 95% of his issues are gone. Like unless you know, you could never tell. So his eyesight came almost completely back. He went from, like I said, barely being able to see to he doesn't even wear glasses anymore. So it's I don't want to tell it's reversible for everybody, but you can. I've never had a patient with MS that we haven't been able to make somewhat better as long as they were under the age of 60.
Amazing, incredible. Now, how does one figure out what their body type is? What do you have to do? What tests to figure out what you are?
It's actually really not that hard. If you just Google somatotype, just SOMATYPE, just Google that, you're going to see pictures of people and you're like, and be honest and be like, that's me. Or,
just purely looking at the different body types, you can identify which you are.
Yeah. The other easy way is, and everybody, it's like this, I go, are you this person? And they look at me and they go, I don't think so. And if you say, I don't think so, it's not you. Like I always tell people, if a friend of yours has a donut, are you going to gain weight? And all my endomorphs go, yeah. I can't even be in the same room as a donut without gaining weight. I'm like, okay, you're an endomorph. And then I ask people, can you drink a 12-pack of beer and eat a large pizza with ranch dressing and not worry about gaining an ounce? And if you go, yeah, you're an ectomorph. If then the big question is, if you step on a scale and go, oh my gosh, I'm 10 pounds overweight, and then you don't do a whole lot, and then you step on the scale 10 days later and you're like, okay, now I'm back down to normal, you're pretty much a mesomorph. Like that's a real rough, easy way of figuring out where you're at. But if you just spend some time Googling it, you're going to figure out, where you are. And if you're like, you know what, I'm definitely not the Kenyan runner, but I'm not fully this guy who can't have any sugar, you're going to find out that you're somewhere in the middle. And it could be that you're 50% endo and 50% meso, and that's cool. Just reset your macros in that field. And if you're anywhere between meso and endo, you can cut your sugars to 0 and help your health. So.
Love it. That's incredible. So we've talked about figuring out what your body type is, getting testing done to see where your hormones are at and your T and things like that. We talked about different blood types. Is there anything else that you would recommend for the audience to be aware about for themselves, to really dial it in and be in the best physical health that they can currently be in?
Yeah. So one of the things I always talk, so when I do concierge work, we have a 2-hour initial intake. And that one of the big things in that intake is I say, I want to know everything about your mom, your dad, your uncle, your brother, your sister. So look at your family. If you're adopted, spend the money, go get your genetics done. Because, if you spend $2,000 getting genetics done today and it prevents a $50,000 heart surgery, you've saved money. I mean, you don't have to be a math genius to figure out 2 is less than 50. So, but talk to your parents and be like, hey, Dad, what health issues have you had? Because I'm your son and I'm your daughter, this is going to affect me. And they'll go through and they'll tell you, what about grandma? What about grandpa? What about Uncle Mark or Uncle Tim or whatever? Go through your entire family, figure out what your family's dealt with, because there's a good chance if a lot of people have had cancer in your family, you're going to deal with it. So for instance, we had a guy come in and he was on testosterone cypionate that he was doing illegally, which is, whatever. But in talking to him, I found out that his dad and his uncle both had prostate issues. One of them had cancer, one of them had benign prostate where prostate puffs up. The problem is that cypionate converts to a hormone called dihydrotestosterone. Dihydrotestosterone is really, really rough on the prostate. And so I was like, did you know this? And he was like, no one told me. And I was like, okay. So I sent him to one of my buddies who we work with hormones wise, and he got nandrolone decanate. DECA or nandrolone decanate does not convert to DHT, and so it's not going to put the pressure on his prostate that cypionate will. Now, cypionate's a great drug, and if you don't have any prostate issues, it's fine. But because this guy had this specific problem in his genetics, in his family history, it told us, hey, man, you need to go talk to somebody about this medication and see if you can get these things changed.
Awesome. Incredible. We had another person ask, should anyone fast from time to time? And basically, who should consider it?
So I do a fast. I fast from about 6:30 until about 11 o'clock, 6:30 at night to 11 o'clock in the morning. And I really, really like that. It does a ton of stuff for us. I do some fasting cardio in there as well, just because I like the way it feels. But it's not for everybody. So my ectomorphs we talked about, those guys need a constant supply of sugars and constant supply of carbohydrates. So it's not always the best for them. And then I almost never, and this is going to start a fight, but I almost never recommend it for my female athletes. A lot of my female athletes shouldn't do it for a number of different reasons. One of the biggest reasons is their hormone cycle. So resetting that cycle is a little bit easier to think about, because it's tied to, psychological function, sleep, and nutrition. So if you can get those things kind of squared away a little bit more, then the cycle kind of regulates a little bit better. But those are some of the things like I said, I don't really recommend it for female athletes. If you're trying to lose fat or something like that, that's a little bit different story. But yes, men, and yes, all your endomorphs can do a great job, but not so much on the women.
Now let's talk about your book. We're coming to the end of the show, and you wrote a book called The Pillars of Wellness, Dr. Chalmers. Tell us a little bit about the book.
So, it was a buddy of mine, Ryan Stuman, has been pushing me to kind of bring stuff out and do stuff online and kind of get things out. And he's like, you need to write a book. And I was like, all right. And so I was like, I'll do that when I have time. And then like 2 months later, COVID happened. And so apparently I had time. And so I wrote the book about the things that I keep seeing, like with the posture stuff, like things that people should know about. You should know about this, the biochemistry stuff. Like you should know about testosterone. You should know about that it's for everybody. You should know about some of the supplementation I talk about in there and why it's good. There's 12 B vitamins. Most people know about 2 of them. So I go through those. But the other 2 pieces that are really important are the psychological piece. You've heard the expression, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And the idea is that where your mind space is extremely important to your health and to your well-being. So getting your mind into a positive focus, being, motivating yourself, deciding you're going to be happy, deciding you're going to be on the positive side of things is super duper important. So we talk a little bit about that. And then the spirituality piece isn't Christianity or Buddhism or something like that. It's basically the way that you interact with the world around you. Like a lot of my guys, part of the concierge thing is I make them give back to society. I'm like, you're not allowed to write a check. Like, I want you to go mentor. I want you to go, affect the world in a way that you're going to leave a mark. It's kind of like, what's your legacy going to be? Like, what have you done? And so, that's a really big piece. And I've had guys come back in who are making tons of money, sell their businesses, quit their jobs, and be like, look, I got enough money. I haven't impacted the world at all. And they realize all of a sudden that their legacy is gone. They're like, I have this giant hole in me. I never knew what it was. And now I know. Like, I've done nothing to help people. And so they're just happy as clams getting out and mentoring. Like, they don't make any money doing it. They don't do anything, but they're going to high schools. They're teaching kids like how not to be a screw up. Like, they'll go into like, look, I walked down this path a long time and now I'm not there anymore. Or they'll go to businesses and be like, hey man, I know you're just starting. These are the screw ups that I made. And after I got through them, I started making a ton of cash. So like, this is how you should set your business up. It'll save you a lot of time and a lot of heartache. And so that's really what we're talking about, is how do you affect the people around you, and how do we make the world a better place? And so that's basically what the spirituality piece is. And so these are just things that I've seen that have really helped impact people's health and quality of life that, maybe it's not the end all, but if we just said, I'm doing 8 of these 10 things, but these 2 that I just read about, that's awesome. I need to pick those up. I need to do some stuff there. So that's kind of why I wrote it, is just kind of a heads up. So, and the guys who've gotten to read it, the people who've gotten to read it said that it's actually really good. So I'm proud of it so far.
Well, guys, let's go support Dr. Chalmers. Where can they find your book at?
It's going to be on Amazon, I think, in about a month. So if you just the Dr. Chalmers 1, if you guys just join that on Instagram and that type of thing, I'll make sure that I drop all the stuff and I tell you guys all the, get it free with shipping and stuff like that. So you guys will get a pretty solid deal on it. So, and then I'll make sure I give Cody a link so that you guys will be able to hit that up too. So, but yeah, it's just, go to the Dr. Chalmers 1. I'll keep you updated about it.
Awesome. Now, where can people connect with you at? Where would you recommend if someone wanted to follow you for advice and just to follow everything that you're doing? Where can they find you? I know you mentioned Dr. Chalmers 1. Is that going to be basically what we're going to search on IG? On like, where are you at right now?
So yeah, Dr. Chalmers 1 on Instagram and all those, that's the best place to look, even on Facebook. I have a Facebook group, Chalmers Wellness group on the Facebook groups. And that's where I end up dropping a lot of information, a lot of stuff like that. And I really love it when people ask me questions, because that's when now I know what you want to know. Instead of me just, randomly talking about weird stuff, like, how you should never do kettlebell swings or something like that. Like, because then we can go and I can answer questions that you guys really care about. So that's what we do at the Chalmers Wellness Group Facebook group page.
Phenomenal. Now, Dr. Chalmers, if someone wants to talk with you, possibly work with you or get a consultation, how would they make that happen?
So you can go to the website, chalmerswellness.com. You can hit us on Facebook at the, any of the Chalmers Wellness Group stuff, or you can just give us a call at 214-446-5300. We do a lot of concierge stuff all over the U.S., and we do that by phone. If you're looking for more chiropractic or more functional stuff, we're in North Dallas, Frisco area. So.
Awesome. And guys, I just see somebody did drop in one of the chats, the Facebook group as well. Make sure you go join that. I know I'm going to. As you can see today, Dr. Chalmers never lets us down. It's been an hour packed full of value. I always like to end on this, Dr. Chalmers. In closing here, if you were just to leave one last gold nugget for me, for the audience, for everyone that watches the replay, what can you leave us with?
You need to take personal responsibility for your health. You've got to take charge of it, and you got to do your own research. And if your doctor won't run a lab, find somebody who will. I've put on the website all sorts of blood labs. The only reason I did it was because I kept hearing people come back and tell me, my doctor won't run testosterone on me. I offered to pay for it, and he said no. And so I got so frustrated. I was like, fine, I'll figure out a way that people can buy their own labs so they can take charge of their own healthcare. And the more and more we go down this road of bad food and high stress, we're all going to have to decide we're going to take care of ourselves. And we're going to take care of we're going to take charge of our own healthcare. So that's a big number one thing I tell people that they got to do.
You heard it, guys. Boom. It's really just being self-aware. Today, the whole topic was looking forward and preventing issues before they become a problem. I really want to encourage all of the Motivation Everything audience. It was really cool to get to bring Dr. Chalmers in today and to get to hear, I don't know about you guys. I mean, I have a page full of notes, all of the insight that he was able to share with us. It's basically preventative maintenance as well, on your body, and also knowing, what you need. Do you need the premium fuel, or can you run on the regular, and really just figuring out what works for you. So I want to encourage you guys to be intentional this year and every year moving forward about your health, about figuring out what works for you and dialing that in so you can live a long and fulfilling life. I feel when we take care of ourselves and we feel well, we're able to then go into the world and do incredible things. Dr. Chalmers, I got to say thank you so much for your time tonight, for all of the wisdom that you shared. We really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime, man.
Absolutely. So guys, appreciate everybody for hopping in that watched live and everybody that watches the replay. This is the end of this week's Motivation Everything show. We'll be back next week with another incredible guest. And I appreciate all of you guys. Go make the rest of this year great. We're out.